In the 1990s, a criminal case shook America to its core, forever changing the country's legal system and leaving an indelible mark on the history of jurisprudence. This case, involving two brutal murders, was not just another criminal trial but a true challenge for the entire U.S. judicial system, forcing lawyers and law enforcement to rethink traditional approaches to investigation and litigation. Now, 3 decades after those tragic events, this case remains one of the most discussed and analyzed criminal trials of the 20th century, having caused significant changes in American justice and becoming a prime example of how individual cases can influence the development of the entire legal system. To this day, it cannot be said with certainty whether Simpson was a villain or a victim of circumstances. Nicole Brown was born on May 19, 1959, in Frankfurt, Germany. She had a sister named Denise. The desire for change prompted the Brown family to move to the United States, where they settled in the city of Garden Grove, California. Here, the family grew with 2 more girls, Dominique and Tanya. Nicole adapted to American society without any problems. The blonde beauty with a gentle disposition won the hearts of everyone who crossed her path. During her school years, she loved spending time on the Sunshine Coast and became the prom queen. The fateful meeting took place in 1977 at one of Beverly Hills' elite clubs, where Nicole worked as a waitress. She met football star O.J. Simpson. At that time, the man was at the peak of his popularity. In addition to sports, he acted in movies and commercials. Despite the fact that O.J. was married to Margaret Whitley at the time and had 3 children, a spark flew between him and Nicole. The age difference of 12 years did not bother the couple at all. Later, a tragedy occurred in the Simpson family. In 1979, his son drowned in a pool as a result of an accident. This led to a deterioration in family relations. That same year, O.J. divorced Margaret. From then on, he began officially dating Nicole. In 1985, the couple got married. Their wedding took place in a luxurious house in the prestigious Los Angeles neighborhood of Brentwood. Taking her husband's last name, Nicole became known as Nicole Brown Simpson. Her whole life was turned upside down. During their years of married life, Nicole and O.J. had 2 children. In 1985, Sydney was born, and in 1987, their son Justin. Nicole was a caring mother. She managed without nannies, organized classes for her little ones, and arranged cozy family celebrations. Despite her household chores, Nicole started a small interior decorating business, with her husband and his friends as clients. It seemed that everything was wonderful in their family. However, the idyll did not last long. All this time, O.J. was cheating on his wife and treating her with superiority. The first alarming sign in O.J.'s behavior was when he took a baseball bat and smashed Nicole's Mercedes. She called the police, and investigators documented the incident. But the woman refused to press charges against her husband. Impunity does not make people better, so the degree of violence escalated. The couple's friends said they saw bruises on Nicole's body. The man threatened to kill her, and she called the police several times during his fits of rage. At such moments, law enforcement officers found Nicole half-naked, beaten, hiding from her husband in the yard of the house a couple of times. O.J. Simpson admitted that he behaved inappropriately towards his wife. He really hit his wife, but insisted that in such incidents, usually both people are to blame. He denied any other incidents of domestic violence that were rumored. The judge sentenced him to 120 hours of community service, a $200 fine, and 2 years of probation. The couple was still struggling, and after 7 years of marriage, in 1992, Nicole decided to file for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Nicole periodically communicated with her ex-husband. They made several attempts at reconciliation due to pressure from her parents, whose business strongly depended on O.J.'s support. But it all turned out to be in vain. The woman and her children moved into a rented house in Brentwood. As a result of the divorce, Nicole received $433,000 in compensation and $10,000 in monthly child support. Nicole bought herself an expensive car and lived a luxurious social life. Her best friend for many years was Kris Jenner, known as the mother of the Kardashian family. They began hanging out as families when Nicole was still married. After the divorce, Kris supported her friend and often helped her by babysitting her children. In December 1992, while skiing in Aspen, Colorado, Nicole met and befriended a man named Cato Kalin. They became so close as friends that he moved into the guest house on Nicole's property and lived there for a year. Cato paid rent and helped take care of Nicole's children, but there was no romantic relationship between them. Despite obtaining a restraining order, OJ stalked Nicole. She saw him literally everywhere. Nicole became paranoid. In January 1994, the woman and her children changed their residence. For safety reasons, she moved into another rented 3-story house in the same neighborhood. Her friend Cato also moved with them and rented the guest house in her yard. Life gradually began to improve, and Nicole had big plans for the future. While she was trying to get her life in order, OJ started a relationship with Christy Prati, who was a brunette at the time they met. It was a wild, turbulent romance. Later, Christy admitted that OJ was obsessed with Nicole and forced her to change her image. At his direction, she dyed her hair blonde and tried to dress like Nicole. Later, they broke up due to OJ's problems with the law. But he also stalked Christy, and she was afraid of him because the man could not let people go. Shortly before the tragic events, Nicole met and began actively communicating with 25-year-old Ronald Goldman, a waiter at her favorite restaurant, Mezzaluna. They met a month and a half before their deaths and were friends. They ran together, drank coffee, and rode in her Ferrari. Some thought they were having an affair, but there was no official confirmation of this. June 12, 1994, became the last day of Nicole and Ron's lives. That day, a dance concert of Nicole's daughter took place, which she attended. Her ex-husband was there as well. Then the woman and her children went to her favorite restaurant around 6 p.m., where she had dinner and crossed paths with Ron. They chatted a bit. Then Nicole and her children went home. Before leaving, Nicole told her friend Kris Jenner that they should meet the next day. Nicole wanted to share something important with her friend, but that meeting never happened. It turned out that Nicole had accidentally left her glasses at the restaurant. Ronald found them and headed to his friend's house to return the accessory to her. At the moment of their meeting near her house in Los Angeles, a chilling tragedy occurred. At 10:45 p.m., Nicole's neighbor Cato heard a suspicious noise coming from her house and went out to check what had happened. There he saw a house dog that was howling incessantly. And then, looking around, the neighbor saw blood and bodies and called 911. The police officers who arrived at the crime scene saw a terrible picture. The photos from the crime scene are very shocking. I will post them on my Telegram channel. The link will be in the description and pinned comment. Subscribe. 35-year-old Nicole was lying in a fetal position in a pool of blood. The young woman was stabbed so many times in the neck area that her head was almost severed from her body. In total, the victim received 7 stab wounds to the neck and head. Her throat was cut. Next to her on the ground lay 25-year-old Ronald, who had also received several deep wounds to the neck area, which were fatal. The coroner determined that the victims were killed between 10:15 and 11 p.m. Given Simpson's years of abuse of Nicole during their marriage and his recent stalking, he became the prime suspect in the double murder. A witness was found who confirmed the police's suspicions. His limo driver said that he had taken the football star to Los Angeles Airport and he had flown to Chicago. OJ arrived in Chicago at 5:30 in the morning. Later, airline employees were interviewed. A flight attendant told investigators that Simpson had kept his hand in a sports bag throughout the flight, as if he was hiding something. Let's go back a bit. At 6:15 a.m., Simpson checked into the O'Hare Plaza Hotel and received the keys to room 915. About 30 minutes later, A man from a gas station told investigators that he had met someone resembling Simpson who was rummaging in the woods near the hotel. Los Angeles detectives called O.J. in his hotel room at 7 a.m. to inform him of his ex-wife's murder. The conversation lasted about 30 minutes. They asked him to return to Los Angeles for questioning. He agreed. According to Simpson's lawyer, it was immediately after the call that O.J. said he had cut his hand when he broke a glass out of pain from the news of his ex-wife's death. But, as mentioned earlier, the flight attendant recalled that he had been hiding his hand the whole time. Perhaps O.J. was doing this because of the wound on his hand, and he had received this injury much earlier, even before arriving in Chicago. From his hotel room, O.J. made 10 calls, including to a woman named Kathy, as well as to various airlines and a car rental company. He bought tickets for a flight to Los Angeles and asked to send a car to take him to the airport. It remained unknown why he was calling Kathy. Next, O.J. called the Los Angeles police at 8:21 and said he would return quickly. A hotel employee said that at 8:30, Simpson came down to the lobby and was upset that his car had not arrived yet, as he was in a hurry to get to the airport. He punched the counter, and his hand started bleeding. O.J. asked the hotel employee to bandage his hand. The car arrived 5 minutes later and took Simpson to the airport, from where he flew back to Los Angeles at 9:15. Meanwhile, detectives flew to Chicago on a tip from an eyewitness and, with reinforcements from local police, searched the wooded area near the hotel using metal detectors. They hoped that O.J. had thrown the murder weapon there, a knife, but nothing could be found. Detectives also searched Simpson's hotel room. Their attention was drawn to the blood-stained bedding, broken glass, and a torn sheet of paper with the name of a Hollywood talent agent. They also took fingerprints and blood samples found on the bathroom floor. When Simpson returned to Los Angeles, he arrived at the crime scene at 11 a.m. There he was hugged by his football teammate Al Collins. O.J. was detained and taken to the police station. Simpson was offered a lie detector test, but he refused. This fact also became a reason for new suspicions. 47-year-old O.J. was charged with double murder. He did not admit his guilt in the murder, but the relatives of both victims already believed that he was responsible for their deaths. But at that time, there was no evidence against him, so the man was released. O.J. took advantage of this moment and disappeared in his white Ford Bronco. Law enforcement began a pursuit. All the nearest patrol cars joined the chase. For 90 minutes, 100 million viewers around the world watched on television as the white Ford sped down the highway. Several helicopters with cameras followed it, as well as patrol cars. Eyewitnesses to this chase lined up along the highway where the armed criminal hostage was moving. They waved at him, trying to cheer him on, supporting him in this situation, despite all the danger he posed with a gun in his hand. Fortunately, no one was hurt. After 100 kilometers, the patrol officers managed to stop the Ford and detain the troublemaker. After that, O.J. automatically became the prime suspect in the double murder. In fact, the police did not even consider other candidates. A family friend claimed that O.J. had told him if he ever caught Nicole with someone, he would kill her. Given that at the time of the murder, Nicole was in the yard of her house with Ron, this could have caused jealousy and an attack of aggression from O.J., who had already previously shown himself to be a domestic tyrant. Relatives said that Simpson had mental problems. He suffered from migraines, sometimes talked to himself, but denied having any mental disorders. The hearings were eventful to the very end. A real star was in the dock, a wealthy black man. The prosecution believed that he had killed his light-skinned ex-wife, and the reason was banal jealousy. Stories of domestic violence surfaced. The defenders, on the other hand, claimed that the football star had been set up by the racist police. This idea was the basis for a tactic that provoked a strong reaction from the African American community. Thousands of activists recalled cases of other African Americans who had unfairly suffered and even become victims at the hands of the justice system. People were outraged that dark skin color was a real red flag for the police. All these issues flared up with renewed vigor, which gave Simpson enormous public support. At the same time, light-skinned Americans continued to consider him guilty. This imbalance in the country's society became especially noticeable. At the trial, Simpson immediately stated that he represented not only his own interests, but also the interests of the entire African American community in Los Angeles. He was at the peak of his popularity in the 60s. At the same time, African Americans began to protest against discrimination and oppression. All this made him a hero of his time in narrow circles. This case formed the basis of several feature films and documentaries, even television series. According to many human rights activists, it was Simpson who played a key role in resolving racial tensions in the United States. During this process, several corrupt officials were exposed who operated in the highest echelons of power, including from the Los Angeles Police Department. Of course, one could fight such opponents only with a dream team. Despite all this and the scale of the event, there are still disputes about whether O.J. Simpson is really guilty. Many believe that the star used his position and wealth to hire the best lawyers who helped him get off scot-free. It was believed that the issue of racial discrimination was raised on purpose in order to divert the attention of the jurors from the bloodthirsty, cold-blooded killer who was hiding under the guise of a decent person. The victim's relatives believed that he had made himself God, so he got away with a lot. The prosecution insisted that he was the obvious killer. Evidence found at the crime scene was presented. He had no serious offenses in the past, except for incidents of domestic violence. This became the main stain on the man's reputation, which the prosecutor emphasized. According to the prosecution, the cruel relationship with his ex-wife and the facts of domestic violence, which some witnesses remembered, were revealed. But Simpson denied all this during the hearing, and it was strange that these facts were ignored by the jurors. The escape attempt was also seen as a desire to evade justice. The prosecution insisted that Simpson was simply afraid, so he tried to run away from the deserved punishment. The lawyers parried these statements, referring to the racist sentiments of the Los Angeles police. In their opinion, the defendant was simply afraid that he would get a bullet before he could clear his name. Attention was also paid to the biography of O.J. Simpson. Nicole and O.J. began dating when he was already a 29-year-old successful married man with 2 children. At that time, Nicole had barely turned 18. The girl found herself surrounded by the luxurious life that Simpson could already afford. From the outside, this marriage looked perfect, but some close friends of the family claimed that behind closed doors, real violence was taking place. Despite O.J.'s denial of these facts, the prosecution had grounds to believe that conflicts involving physical force did occur in the couple. Shortly before her death, Nicole told a friend that she feared for her life and health, as Simpson periodically lost control of himself. O.J. behaved like an owner and manipulator. Corresponding entries were found in her diaries, which were actively used by the prosecution during the trial. One of the key pieces of evidence of Simpson's guilt, according to the prosecution, was the glove. At the scene of the massacre, an article of clothing was found that was covered in blood. According to one of the Los Angeles police detectives, another identical glove was found in O.J.'s house. One of the former investigators of the department even wrote a whole book in which he described in detail the evidence found that indicated Simpson's guilt. There were also opponents of this work who accused the man of bias and racial prejudice. Many believed that his book was completely fabricated and that the bloody glove was simply planted in the black man's house. The refutation of the prosecutor's claims related to the glove took place right in the courtroom. The defendant was asked to try it on. It turned out that it really did not fit him in size. For the ominous glove to end up on the hand of this hefty man with an athletic build, he had to make a lot of effort, during which it almost tore. It would really be inconvenient for him to hold a knife and wield it in such gloves. What's interesting is that the fitting of the glove was initiated by the prosecution. Later, this decision was described as the biggest legal failure of the law enforcement system in the 20th century. The prosecution insisted that no foreign blood was found at the scene of the massacre, only that belonging to the victims, as well as O.J. His DNA was also found in the defendant's car. According to the lawyers, this was not direct evidence of involvement in the massacre. The defenders continued to insist that the client had simply been wounded because he was sure that as a black man, he would face an unfair trial. Later, Simpson described the events from his perspective. The hearings were a frightening experience for him. He realized that he could not trust anyone present, neither the judge nor the jurors. For them, a black man was, by default, an enemy. The lawyers skillfully manipulated the facts. They believed that if it were about the murder of a black woman, Simpson's case would have been closed long ago. But in the case of a light-skinned woman, the prosecution persistently tried to accuse the black man. Despite his apparent non-involvement in the tragedy, the defense insisted that the real criminal, on whose hands was the blood of two young people, was still at large and looking for a new victim. To give weight to their words, the prosecution decided to conduct a tour of Simpson's house. A team of jurors and representatives from the defense were brought to the mansion. Despite the fact that during O.J.'s absence, a large number of photos appeared on the walls where he interacts with representatives of the black community. It seems that all this was played out in such a way as to demonstrate a connection with crime, to discredit the athlete and actor's position. This was necessary in order to create a less attractive image of the star, which should have played into the hands of the prosecution in this trial. At the same time, among the visitors were people who were well acquainted with Simpson. They confirmed that they had never seen these photographs before. Could the prosecution really have arranged a real conspiracy to frame an innocent man? O.J.'s first wife testified at the trial and confirmed that she had not encountered violence from her husband, so she did not believe that he was capable of murder. Towards the end of the trial, something unexpected happened. One of the detectives in the case gave a series of interviews in which he boasted that he had beaten suspects, especially blacks, and falsified evidence. The prosecutor denied that this could have happened in this case, but her words, it seems, were not heard. This tilted the scales even more in favor of the defense. The trial lasted 16 months. All this time, O.J. was under house arrest. After the closing arguments of both sides, the jurors went to deliberate on the verdict. After 4 hours, they returned and found O.J. Simpson not guilty of double murder. He was acquitted. O.J. smiled and said, "Thank you." 2 jurors smiled back. Another raised his left fist in greeting to Simpson as the jurors left the courtroom. The victims' families were disappointed with the verdict, which did not meet their expectations. Relatives believed that the jurors were enchanted and under the influence of a famous personality, so they were not convinced by any arguments against him. This decision sparked a wave of conflicting emotions. The Stars fans rejoiced. The African American community felt that the first major victory of their race in history had taken place, and the families of O.J.'s victims were beside themselves with rage. Almost the whole world followed these events. Hundreds of reporters tried to interview Simpson and his lawyers, as well as all the other participants in the trial. TV shows were thundering on this topic, competing with each other. 9 months after the verdict, O.J. Simpson was still recovering. He met with a news channel correspondent and told him what he would have to live with after this high-profile case. The man said that his life had never been easy, but now the difficulties were a little different. He had built a career in sports and film, but after such a long break and problems with his reputation, it was all destroyed. During this period, O.J. focused on his family, children, and friends. While the ex-wife was alive, the couple's children lived with her. After the mother's death, during the trial, Nicole's relatives took the children. Now Simpson was fighting for custody of his daughter and son. Another controversial trial began, in which each side tried to portray the other in an unflattering light. In 1996, after the criminal trial ended, the judge granted Simpson's petition for full custody of his and Nicole's children. The relatives of the deceased were outraged by this decision and continued to fight unsuccessfully for custody. They gave up the fight in 2006, when the youngest child turned 18 and officially became an adult. In 1997, a civil suit was filed against Simpson, initiated by the families of the deceased. This time the process turned out to be very fast. The prosecution argued for the speed of the investigation and decision-making by the preponderance of evidence against the accused, as well as the indisputability of the evidence found. Among them were such items as photos of Simpson at the time of his arrest, in which he was wearing the same shoes, the traces of which were then found at the scene of the massacre. This time O.J. was confident and decided not to hire a team of experienced lawyers, on which he had already spent a pretty penny. But it turned out that everything was not so simple. The case was progressing at a staggering pace. Simpson was found guilty of wrongful death and ordered to pay the victims' families $33.5 million in compensation. However, O.J. never paid the lion's share of this money. After these incidents, Simpson continued to restore his shattered reputation. According to his own confession to the media, he became much better at playing golf, and then even wrote a book called If I Did It, in which he described in the first person how he would have committed the murder if he had been behind it. This work became another controversial stage in his biography. It caused a wave of protest as well as a counter-wave of support. The greatest outrage was expressed by the families of the victims, because they were still convinced that it was O.J. who was behind the murder of the young people. The money from the sale of the book was sent to the family of the murdered Ron. It is worth noting that after the previous hearings, the double murder case subsided and remained in the archives for years. The knife used in the murder was never found. In 2016, the Los Angeles police recalled that a retired officer had turned in a knife that had allegedly been found several years earlier by a construction worker during the demolition of Simpson's house. After examination, it turned out that the knife was not the murder weapon. The next episode related to crime occurred during his trip to Las Vegas in 2007. Together with a group of armed men, he burst into the home of a local sports merchandise dealer. As Simpson later admitted, this attack was not related to crime or a desire to make money. By a twist of fate, this person somehow ended up with photographs and memorabilia related to sports that were valuable to Simpson. Some of them he called family heirlooms. It seems that it was not possible to agree on a price. O.J. insisted that the only reason for the attack was the desire to get all these items back for himself. But in fact, they tried to steal sports trophies worth thousands of dollars. In the end, he had to use the best team of lawyers again to defend himself in court. It seems that the case was going very badly for him, because the police officers were even able to obtain the firearms with which the company of 5 people made their way onto someone else's territory. Simpson was charged on 12 counts, including robbery and assault with a weapon. Against the background of the previous high-profile trial and other suspicious episodes in the man's biography, the court sentenced him to 33 years in prison. Many saw this as a symbolic coincidence with the amount of payments to the families of the deceased, which amounted to $33.5 million. However, the judge insisted that there could be no symbolism here, and the term fully corresponded to the seriousness of the crime committed. Now the best lawyers in Las Vegas filed an appeal to conduct a review of the case in Nevada. According to Simpson, he never saw the firearms that the prosecution demonstrated. The prosecution used several guns allegedly seized from the detained criminals as physical evidence in this case. O.J. again claimed that all this was planted on him in order to take revenge for his victory in the previous high-profile case. This event could indeed provoke such a reaction, since it ruined several careers and fates, launched a whole cycle of revising attitudes towards African Americans in the United States, which could not but cause a wave of outrage. After that, many people suffered, including high-ranking officials. At the same time, This did not prove that Simpson was unequivocally innocent. The lawyers had to prove again that 33 years for an unsuccessful attempted robbery, during which no one was hurt, was too severe a punishment. The lawyers recalled cases when much shorter terms were assigned for murder. The court continued to insist that the decision was in accordance with state law, and the appeals were rejected. Meanwhile, Simpson was behind bars. Here he was treated just as ambiguously as at large. Some considered him a fighter for justice. Others called him a bloodthirsty killer who belonged in prison. During this period, tension between the black community and the authorities continued to grow. Several unfortunate incidents occurred. Simpson spent almost 9 years in prison. At the age of 70, he unexpectedly, thanks to a new amendment on the rehabilitation of prisoners, received the right to parole. Based on the results of the commission's vote, he was granted freedom. O.J. did not repent when he was released on parole in October 2017. After these events, the elderly African American, having become a prominent figure in the criminal world and cinema, went into the shadows. According to him, he just wanted to spend the rest of his days in a calm environment with his close children, who had been waiting for him all this time and supporting him. Nicole's son and daughter believed that their father had been wrongfully convicted and had become a victim of discrimination. While still in prison, O.J. dreamed of returning to his house, but ruins awaited him there. The house was lost due to the fact that the man lost the right to redeem it. Instead, he moved to a gated community in Las Vegas, where he played golf and enjoyed life. As it turned out, the wheels of justice did not stand still. Now a new detective was officially instructed to investigate the unsolved murder of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. New investigators began to consider the involvement in the murder of serial killer Glenn Edward Rogers, also known as the Casanova Killer. He was found guilty of first-degree murder of 2 women. The first was in Florida in 1997, the second in California in November 1999. During his arrest, Glenn initially mentioned to the police that he had committed about 70 murders. Later, he recanted this confession. Glenn is a suspect in many other similar murders in different states of the United States, but his involvement in these cases has not yet been proven. He was sentenced to death in Florida and California. Since 1997, he has been on death row in Florida, awaiting execution. It is believed that he could have killed Nicole Brown and her friend. So far, there is no news about the solving of the double murder. It still remains a mystery and causes controversy and questions about who O.J. Simpson really was. Should he be considered a fighter for justice and the very man who tried to initiate a new round of changes and shifts in the U.S. legislative system? Or maybe he was a bloodthirsty killer who simply had enough money and audacity to avoid punishment for a double murder. Answering these questions, which still prompt reflection, will probably never be possible. On April 10th, 2024, O.J. Simpson died of cancer, remaining one of the most controversial personalities. The tragic and controversial story of O.J. Simpson leaves more questions than answers. Was he a fighter for African American rights, an innocent victim of racial discrimination and a biased justice system? Or perhaps a cold-blooded killer who managed to escape punishment thanks to his wealth, popularity, and skilled lawyers? The truth, it seems, lies somewhere in the middle, or maybe it is impossible to establish at all. This case forever changed America, exposing deep racial divisions and distrust between the black community and law enforcement. It also demonstrated how powerful money, fame, and public opinion can be in a courtroom. And although almost 3 decades have passed, this story continues to excite the minds and hearts of people around the world. Perhaps we will never know the whole truth about what happened on that fateful night of June 12, 1994. But one thing we know for sure: 2 young lives, Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman, were brutally cut short, and this tragedy forever changed the fates of their loved ones. And whatever one's personal views on the guilt or innocence of O.J. Simpson, we all must remember the real victims of this chilling story. The story of O.J. Simpson is not just a detective puzzle or a courtroom drama. It is a complex and painful saga of fame, power, race, love, hate, violence, and justice. It forces us to reflect on many uncomfortable questions and perhaps reconsider some of our established notions. And although the final period has already been put in this story, its echo will long resound in our hearts and minds. If you like this and other fascinating stories about the most high-profile and mysterious crimes, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Detective Brooks. There you will find even more investigations of real criminal cases, exclusive details, and my expert opinion. Support my work with your subscriptions, comments, and likes. And remember, even the most intricate cases are within the power of an experienced detective to solve.